Hi, welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. My guest this week is Gunther Weil. Gunther's been here before, but he's so interesting. I've asked him back again. Today we're going to be talking about the idea of going from aging to saging. How creative aging is a very important process, especially for those of us who are doing that, hopefully creatively. But he is an expert in this as far as I'm concerned. He's a role model of mine. And I think if there's anybody who could speak wisely to this topic and sagely to this topic of going from aging to saging, it's Gunther Weil. Stick around. Here it goes. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Gunther, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here, Doug. Consider this an encore.
Yes.
So,
Indeed. It's so good to see you. I know it's funny because, when I watch those credits roll, I see some pictures of me from like 10 years ago or something. Like, yeah, how am I doing with that aging thing? I need to get some new pictures, I think is what happened. So I remember a few years ago, you were teaching a course in Qigong, or was it Qigong? It was something like that, Qigong, work you had learned from Montauk Chia, and you were teaching us this work in the workshop in New York City. And you were saying at the time you were like probably 50. I don't know, maybe you were 60, but a lot younger than you are now. Somewhere around my age. But I remember you saying basically this shit works. This is really, it's like you stay healthy, you stay strong. I remember somebody, a friend of mine was teaching, was a Tai Chi master. And he said he was teaching Tai Chi in a park once, and there was this elderly Chinese woman watching. And after the class, she said, is that the Tai Chi you're doing? He said, yes. And she said, and it can help you stay alive, for a lot longer. He says, oh, then I don't want that. She said.
Well, that pretty much sums it up in a way, does it not? That anecdote really, it's a very condensed, compressed, almost like an anagram in a way of how our general society views aging. And in this particular instance, I'm generalizing here, but I think for the most part, this is a pretty accurate generalization that we generally hold the aging process to be one of gradual infirmity, of purposelessness, of meaninglessness, of isolation, of alienation, of remorse, of regret. I could go on and on with the adjectives around, and that the story you're relating here. No, I don't want that. Why would I want to live longer? Basically, so. We in the course of our talk today, we can examine that more closely and look at some of the features of that belief system and the parameters of that.
Sounds great. So there's so much for us to talk about. I have so many questions for you, and I do want to respect the hour-long thing. So I'm going to just charge into some topics. Part of the reason I wanted you here is because you are, like I said, is a role model for me as far as this, aging gracefully and with energy and vitality and just purpose in life. I mean, you're always recreating yourself. You're doing things that you weren't doing before. And, the last time we had you on the podcast, we talked extensively about that. But I've also been listening to other podcasts, other people. Like there's a man named Daniel Atea. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a doctor, but he's a former ultra marathoner or ultra athlete who did that sort of stuff. And now he just doesn't have enough time in his day to do those things anymore. But he still does a lot of athletics, a lot of working out, and paying attention to his diet and sleeping and sunlight. But his newest book is about training for your final decathlon, I think is the way he frames it, which is to say, your final decade of life. Like if you want to be, if you're from 90 to 100, let's just say, or 80 to 90, whatever it might be, whatever your final decade is, how do you want to be in that final decade? Do you want to be able to walk up a flight of stairs by yourself? Do you want to be able to get up off the ground by yourself? Do you want to be able to open a jar of mayonnaise by yourself? He said, well, if you do want those things, then you better start training for them now, because we need to, have the base of energy to build, to maintain muscle mass, to maintain the VO2 max, to maintain, our mental capacity and stuff, to be those things when we're in that final decathlon. So I think that's fascinating, but not everybody's going to be lifting weights. One of the things he said you needed to be able to do is the fireman's carry. Get this. He said that a person should be able to do a farmer's carry, which is basically you pick up a heavy weight and walk with it, right? So you see people doing this at the gym with kettlebells, and they pick up a 30-pound kettlebell and just walk around the gym with it. And you should be able to do that. If you're a woman, you should be able to do that with 75% of your body weight, with one dumbbell in each hand, and walk around the gym for a minute. 75%. He said a man should be able to do 100% of his body weight. And so I tried that. I went to the gym. I picked up 100, I'm 200 pounds. So I picked up a 100-pound dumbbell. I tried to pick up a 100-pound dumbbell. I could not pick up a 100-pound dumbbell in each hand. So I went down to 50 pounds. I picked up a 50-pound dumbbell in each hand, so half my body weight, and walked around the gym. That was hard to do. It was really hard to do for me. I did do it, but when I put those dumbbells back down again, I felt like I was going to float off the ground. It was amazing. But anyways, that's a particular kind of exercise. And you do Qigong, and you do other things. So I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say, and I'll stop talking just a minute, because Atea is so persuasive that people might think, okay, that is the only way to prepare for your decathlon. But I think there are other ways and other creative ways. And, goodness gracious, you have one of the most creative lives I've known. You dropped acid with Timothy Leary back in the 1960s. And, it was just wealth of information. So let's hear from you now that I've exhausted.
I would say this, within the framework that you're describing around lifting the weights and building, generally what's called resistance training, resistance training, basically, which is along with aerobic training, are the yin and yang, basically the two sides of the Western coin around physical, physical health, muscular health, to a degree, stability, to a lesser degree, balance, and there are a number of other considerations there. But I would say this, that within that framework, you have to look at it from a developmental perspective. In other words, for you to go to the gym and pick up 200 pounds, almost like what's it called in weightlifting, I forgot the phrase in weightlifting, but
like a clean jerk.
A clean jerk. Thank you. Yeah. Hopefully, we're not being jerks. So that takes time.
Yeah,
So you can't expect to go there once and pick up that weight. You have to look at it from the standpoint of a training methodology,
right.
and you look at that as an attainable goal over the course of a month or two or three or whatever your trainer would recommend based on your starting point, let's say, and your degree of overall health and energy and stamina and muscular strength. So you want to build it up. Now, I can't speak to the merits of that, although I can speak to the merits of doing some resistance training, which I think is important for muscular health. But I think there are deeper levels of conditioning that appear more in the Eastern traditions of fitness and health that have to do with the health of the vital organs,
Hmm.
which are pretty much ignored. I mean, there's no Western methodology that I know of around training the health of the vital organs, you know, uh, so which is an essential aspect of Eastern medicine and Eastern practices such as Tai Chi and Qigong and others. There's also, a whole area around the health of the joints,
Hmm.
which is also we tend to ignore the. We do emphasize the importance of resistance training and muscular health and stretching. Uh, Thank God, stretching has its place in the repertoire, but there's really little or no attention paid to the health of the joints, other than remedial procedures around joint replacement or various injections and things, or even looking at some possibilities of stem cell regeneration. So that's all within the Western context, and I think all of that's fine for what it is. But if we step back for a moment uh, and look at even the protocol or the and the paradigm it represents, okay,
Hmm.
which is sort of like bringing the performance productivity paradigm into the aging, into basically. So we have a tendency in our society, I believe, to kind of unquestionably uh, take a paradigm that's applicable to the earlier stages of life, particularly post adolescence, as we're entering our middle, late 20s, 30s, 40s, up to 50s, and even to some extent now with increasing longevity into our 60s, we have a whole Western tradition of the importance of productivity and action and competition and achievement. All of that is kind of manifest in the example that you described. So I'd like to suggest that while that has its place, to rely exclusively on that kind of model, I think is basically an exercise in futility, because sooner or later, you're going to experience the decline anyway, no matter what you do. Okay, it's a matter of when. So we can delay it some years, a few years, or maybe more. But sooner or later, you're going to be dealing with the same challenge
Yeah,
and the
no doubt.
same issues that come up. And for in terms of the aging process and what most people in our society experience, along the lines of the anecdote that you mentioned that I provided some color for, around the belief systems that people have around aging, basically.
Yeah.
So with the decline of the physical body and the inability to maintain a level of achievement and a level of productivity and a level of performance, if those are the only criteria or the embedded values that are basically running the show, uh, again, one is going to run right smack dab into the wall of futility, basically, and the wall of frustration, because as the Buddhists, particularly the Buddhists, but of course it's not restricted to Buddhists. Buddhism is a recognition, basically, that suffering and death are, two of the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so how do we approach that aspect? How do we approach the loss of physical function? How do we approach the loss of various skills and abilities? Uh, so I'm like, I'll be 88 in January, next January. So I'm
Right.
halfway through this 88th year, 87 going on 88. So, it was about last year sometime I had to renew my driver's license. And I also have had some physical challenges in the last year, quite a few actually, one of which necessitated my having a pacemaker installed because of a condition called bradycardia, which is a slowing down or an intermittency in the heart rate, which can cause fainting, which was starting to happen to me. And I actually had an automobile accident because I fainted while I was driving. I
Oh,
survived the accident. And that accident was last July, actually. So uh, now I've healed a lot from that and continue to heal. And a lot of my healing has to do with my Tai Chi and Qigong practices and the Eastern traditions of which I've been training many years, along with a lot of loving care from my wife and good nutrition and some really expert medical interventions, both Eastern and Western. So, but what it brought up for me, for example, was I was renewing my driver's license was a memory of taking my dad and his car to the automobile dealer to basically sell it because he could no longer safely drive. And he
hmm
was my age. He was my age at that time.
hmm
So he died at 89. So, and I said, I'm 87 going on 88, and I'm still driving. But it brought up for me that memory of my loving dad and what I witnessed as all of his the frustration and the fear and the insecurities that came up around the loss of his ability to drive, which in our society has a lot of symbolism, a lot of embedded context around the loss of mobility and the loss of function and the loss of freedom. I could go on and on, right, with some of those characteristics. So as I thought about, as I was applying for the renewal of my driver's license, I thought, it's just a matter of time before I'm not going to be able to drive. As a matter of fact, for most of this past year, uh, I was not able to drive because I was not allowed to drive because of the arrhythmia, basically, of the bradycardia. I couldn't afford to have another accident and endanger myself or other people. So it was really interesting for me to go through that process and to relive the anecdote with my father and look at some of the parallel thoughts and beliefs that are arising in this consciousness around the symbolism of loss of driving and the inability to maintain a certain functional life and social life and being dependent on other people and the whole issue of dependency. So it brought up a lot of interesting, psychological themes and topics and conditioned patterns for me to
Well,
examine.
so let's delve into that a bit more because I think those interesting topics are interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear more about that because it is, as you say, something that's going to happen to all of us. I mean, it happened to your dad. It's happening to you. It'll happen to
Yeah.
me. I
Yeah.
remember similar situations with my mother when she had to stop driving, and it's like that loss of independence.
Yes.
Very, very,
Now,
very.
now, now, if we were to like expand that view a little bit
Okay.
and start to look at some other loss of functions. Okay, so for example, I've made my living for many years doing executive coaching and consulting, as you know.
hmm
I have co-developed and evolved a values paradigm and a values assessment tool to look at an individual or a group's values and how those relate to various choices they make at different stages of their life and so on. It's a very robust methodology. I've continued to, because I'm still working, although I'm slowing down a little bit now at this stage of my life. But over the years, I've worked with many very high profile individuals, very successful financially and socially, and in terms of, their kind of power base. And particularly, this is true among men executives, but also, I think, also true of women uh, who, as the glass ceiling has lifted in many professions, and as women have developed into stronger leadership positions and positions of power and influence, they're also beginning to experience that as they approach retirement. So, in working, for example, with these kind of individuals, both men and women, but mostly men that I had the experience with, uh, the loss of their status as a leader of the corporation, right, as the CEO, the loss of that perceived status within the community, the loss of the functions, the the elimination, if you will, or the loss of FaceTime meetings with people with the perceived, again, status in the community, including for many of them often nonprofit or even philanthropic activities, uh, creates an existential crisis basically for
Sure.
them. So
Absolutely.
the question then arises: who am I if
Mhm.
I'm not the CEO of this company X or company Y? Right?
Absolutely.
Uh,
For sure.
who am I? And so, they face an abyss, basically, of a loss of meaning and purpose because the whole paradigm and the nested values that are part of that belief system have to do with productivity and achievement and competition and doing and aggregation and acquisition and so on and so forth. Again, I could run through a laundry list of adjectives that describe that worldview, if you will, that
Yeah.
paradigm, that
Yeah.
mean. So, in doing coaching with people like that, and you've done a lot of that as well, you have to start to look at what are some other kind of meaningful beliefs and values that can represent a healthy stage of aging, or what we're calling here saging, moving from an aging paradigm to a saging paradigm, so that at the age of 60 or 70 or whenever it is that people are 65, which has typically been the retirement age, although that's moving up now in the 70s. But when people get to that age or my age, and their whole life up to that point has been predicated on a highly individualistic, capitalistic achievement model and productivity model, when that is taken away from them, or they're no longer able to achieve at that level because of lack of energy or infirmities or just even the diminishing of cognitive and memory and things like that. It creates a crisis for them, a psycho-spiritual crisis, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
Let me just stop you there. So yeah, I
yeah.
know that's true, and I've seen it before. I've seen it. It seems to be a kind of commonality that when, like, my uncle retired, and then basically 3 months later he died, and that's not uncommon, for people
Right.
to retire and then just like, whoops, they're gone. And I think it has to do with that. It's like it becomes an existential crisis that they don't have an answer for. It's like, who am I? I'm nobody anymore. I'm not that
Right.
CEO, or I'm not that principal or whatever. I'm just a schlub. Why bother?
Yes.
Why bother living? So, and it's a interesting thing for us as coaches, as people who have helped others through the situation, because we know about belief systems, we know about how to change beliefs and influence beliefs. How was it for you personally when you were having to not drive and stuff? When these things come up, sometimes it's different, when it's you rather than just a concept or
Sure. No, I found it challenging, but again, I was able to create some workarounds. Uh, Basically, I called or wrote and called and spoke to like 4 or 5 friends, male friends, basically. Although, also a woman friend offered. I didn't take her up on the offer, but she offered. And these people then, I told them what was going on with me, and they all were willing to, on occasion, pick me up and drive me to a medical appointment, or drive me to a haircut, or drive me to a PT session, a massage session, basically. So although I have been greatly restricted this last year in terms of, I say, the ability to drive. Although I'm driving again now because it's safe for me to drive, because again I've gone through a long enough period without incidents now around the arrhythmia because of the pacemaker and other things that I feel confident and safe driving. But during that period, it was challenging. But I, with the support again of Ellen, my wife, and also my own training and many years of experience in both in coaching and in various technologies of coaching, including NLP, as you know, because we've been through that together, and other methodology, and certainly a practice of meditation and certain philosophical and practical philosophical mind-body practices of various types. I've been able to deal with that particular question, okay, that particular issue. You know,
Yeah.
Now there are others that I'm going to be facing over the next few years. Again, I'm going to be 88, so for example, when I practice Tai Chi. For example, I don't have the same level of balance that I used to have when I'm doing like one-legged stances and kicks, for example.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I've had to kind of do some workarounds around what this mind-body vehicle can do, basically, without complaining, without kind of a sense of of loss. Basically just had to adopt an attitude that, okay, this is what this particular mind body constellation is capable of doing at this time.
Yeah.
And there's some incremental improvement that can be done within that framework, particularly as I'm coming out of as I'm continuing to heal from the variety of injuries that I had, one of which included, for example, you know, some damage to my ankle, and from a fall that I had and from the automobile crash.
Mhm.
So it's all a question of, fundamentally, in my opinion, a matter of attitude, basically, or what attitude you hold. So it's sort of like in a way, the Serenity Prayer,
Yeah,
right?
I've been thinking about that. I've talked about that recently a number of times, and I keep intending to Google who wrote that thing, and I have not done so. But I think that Serenity Prayer is just brilliant. I
I
really
think
do.
it was Reinhold Niebuhr, I believe. I'm not certain of that,
You know
but I
what? That
believe.
rings a bell. I think you're right. I think that's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But it's just
So,
brilliant. And
so
I don't.
you asked me about my personal experience, so I'm giving you the kind of lowdown on on the arrhythmia, the automobile accident, a related fall that happened because I faded, and all of that creating a lot of injuries in this body and restricting the function of driving and certainly a certain amount of socialization. Uh, Although as I'm getting older, I don't crave the kind of socialization that I used to have as a younger person. I'm much more interested in quality than quantity.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, there's been a shift in the dialectics of my life from competition to cooperation, from achievement and acquisition to basically with satisfaction with what I do have rather than a dissatisfaction with what I don't have. Uh, the which is an important movement in consciousness. Uh, I could look at it again through this lens of these dialectics, basically. But at the age of when people get in their late 60s and 70s, and this aging process really becomes clear, and if they're consciously moving towards a more conscious aging, which we're calling here saging. So I would say that saging is conscious aging.
Okay, good.
So if I could provide like a definition of it, and by the way, I just kind of made that up on the spot. So it was, so saging is conscious. Conscious aging is saging. Saging is conscious aging. So what do we mean by conscious aging? And conscious aging, for me, has a lot of different moving parts and attributes, but certainly one fundamental aspect of that, which is a given, and without that, there can be no real movement in that dimension. Now, there has to be an awareness of the function of how the mind works, basically, within the framework of consciousness. So, and how conceptual mind works, and how the mind that shapes our values and our beliefs and our assumptions about life and therefore about aging, as well as many other aspects of life, how we have to understand how the mind actually functions, basically, to create the sense of me. And therefore, the issues of what is becoming of me, or what will I be at this age, and what will my life be like when I lose all these functions. It's all basically a kind of egocentric, you know, it's another maybe word for that, is a self-referential framework, basically. What's called currently in kind of cutting edge of neuroscience as the default network. You may have heard that. Have you heard that expression?
Yes.
Basically, so it's a very interesting kind of contemporary neurophysiological model of how the self-referential ego system is structured and works, and the mechanisms by which it works. So, from a psychospiritual perspective, which again is required or demanded by this staging concept. It not only does it invite a need for an examination of the role of mindfulness and other mind-body practices, and also some leading edge, even technology support for understanding how our egoic structure, how our ego develops, how it manifests throughout the course of our life, and how as we approach our mortality and our death, the survival of the little me becomes paramount. Okay? And how do we go in and start to look at being able to examine that default network and begin to suspend some of its functions, so that there is greater flexibility, greater adaptability, greater acceptance. And by acceptance, I don't mean resignation, but real acceptance of our age, of our condition, of our where we are in our life. So we need to start to look at how do we let go of the little me, basically. Okay?
Tell us more about what you mean by the little me, just for those who are not aware.
It's all basically the fabricated self through our education, through the conditioned patterns of our society, of our education, of our parental system, of our if you're have an openness to this, our whatever karma that we've inherited, if any kind of past life belief systems are operating, uh, all the conditioned patterns that create the sense of Gunther or Doug, basically,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
warts and all, if you will, right? So how do we begin to let go of that attachment to the little me, basically,
So
and
because it's very interesting because one of the things that came out in our first discussion, I think it was the first discussion, but you told me a while back, was that when you were a graduate student, when you first started your PhD studies at Harvard, that Timothy Leary was your faculty advisor, and
yes,
basically within a couple of weeks of matriculating there at Harvard, you were dropping acid with Timothy Leary, and those mind expanding experiences, I think, are very helpful for a person to understand the distinction between the little me and the big me, and the
yeah,
capital S self and the small s self.
yeah.
How important do you think those kinds of experiences are for a person to be able to do this elegantly, this moving from aging to saging?
I would say they're neither a necessary or sufficient condition, but they are helpful. And
Okay.
if one, through whoever one's life, karma, or circumstances, or just random events, uh, and that's how it was for me, basically. From one perspective, it was like kind of just sort of like circumstantial, but from another through another lens of consciousness, I can see the patterns in my life that led me to become interested in working with Tim. And by the way, just to set the record straight, it wasn't LSD in the first couple of years; it was psilocybin.
Okay.
Just to just to give you a technical, correction there, but I can see the pattern in my life prior to that. My interest in philosophy, which I majored in college, my exposure to and interest in music, and particularly jazz and bebop and improvisation, and because I was an amateur musician, drummer, jazz drummer, bebop drummer. So having, and what happens in a jazz setting with other musicians when you're improvising is there's an ability to access this egoless state, basically, because you're working in a way. I'm putting a conceptual structure on this, so it's not that complex, but basically when you're working together with other musicians in the moment, okay, and you're supporting each other, whether I'm soloing or not. If I'm soloing, then the other musicians are supporting me in that solo, if they're good,
Right.
which is the essence of it. And in turn, when it's their turn to solo, then I move into a servant leadership role there, basically. So
Yeah.
you experience the kind of what I'm calling right at the moment servant leadership, uh, which is as you well know, a historical coaching model of being able to step in and step out of an ego identity as a leader, for example,
Sure.
depending on what the role or function is. So I had that experience to a very modest extent earlier in life, and again through music and my interest in philosophy. I was and my experience of hanging out with jazz musicians for when I was a young man. Growing up in Milwaukee and Chicago, and then later in Paris and in Europe. When I lived abroad, for a while. So I can see that I was primed for that, basically. All
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
when Tim said to me, all the work that I'd done before as a psychologist, he said, was useful and helpful. But last summer I was in Cuernavaca and I took the magic mushrooms, and I'm only interested now in human consciousness and how I can research that and explore how, for example, the psychedelic drugs, and particularly psilocybin, which was the focus at that time, can really help us understand human consciousness. And he said to me, if you're interested in that, I'm willing to be your faculty advisor. If you're not, I would recommend that you're going to need to work with somebody else. And I said, count me in, Tim. So, I didn't miss a beat. Okay. My time,
Which is good for a drummer.
yeah, my timing was, it was, it was perfect. So that was the beginning. And a week later, I had my first psilocybin session at Tim's house in Newton, Mass, with some other people. And I've written about that or spoken about that rather in some podcasts. I
Mm-hmm.
won't go over that today. And that was the beginning of that exploration. So coming back to your question around the role of psychedelics in being able to help people make that distinction between the little me or the small mind and big mind, or between conditioned default network versus the free space of pure consciousness, or a unified field of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
depending again on what aspect of consciousness we're talking about here. Uh, yeah, the psychedelics can provide as I began to talk about it in the last 3 years around this psychedelic renaissance, is a sort of like trailer of what's possible for human beings.
Mm.
Right? But you still got to do the work. The
Yes.
drugs themselves aren't going to do the work for you. They can provide like a medium currency and of exchange, or to change the metaphor, a trailer, as I said a moment ago, of what might be possible for human beings in
Right.
terms of moving outside of the little me, the self-referential default network, into much greater freedom.
Yeah.
So yeah, they can be a very useful tool in that regard, particularly if one is deploying them with that set of assumptions and beliefs around their utility in that context. Okay,
Yeah.
that's really important, and that involves a healthy dose of attention to the what we called, and was being called, continued to be called, the kind of integration phase of psychedelics. So you still got to do the work.
So
I had to do the work. And so I was in my early 20s, 24 or something, I think 25, when I had that experience with Tim, and that set in motion, a lifelong exploration of a variety of mind-body practices
mm-hmm.
and psychospiritual practices, of many of them stemming from the wisdom traditions of Buddhism and Taoism, and the Gurdjieff work, which was a central part of my spiritual training, and followed by some important teachers and teachings from those lineages and traditions, which I continue. So I've had to do the work, and everyone has to do the work. But the opportunity that psychedelics provide is they can give you a glimpse, a trailer, a preview of what might be possible in order to prime the pump, in order to set in motion, if you will, the underlying motivation and the yearning for inner freedom. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
fast forward to the saging process we're talking about today. In a way, the same challenge arises as you approach your mortality.
Well, that's
Because
funny. I'm so glad you came back to that, because I was thinking, you said everyone has to do the work, but not everyone does the work until they have to do the work.
right.
And one of the things that aging senses, like, hey, here, this is, you got to do this now. And it really sort of makes you do the work, whether you're ready for it or not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say it's an invitation.
Okay.
Uh, nothing makes you do it.
That's true.
In fact, there's every reason to believe that the conditioned patterns that that have been present in most of my life uh, don't lead me to that inference or that conclusion or that need,
Mm,
basically.
yeah.
Uh, so there's no guarantee that just aging itself is no guarantee of anything. If anything, for the vast majority of human beings, the process of aging is a process of crystallization, if you will. And that's a crystallization of the body, a crystallization of the emotions, and a crystallization process of the mind. So if we break that down a little bit more, if we look at, for example, the loss of mobility, the injuries relating to falls and a lack of balance, the lack of attention to maintaining the health of the internal vital organs and the soft tissue, uh, the 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 lack of attention to proper nutrition, uh, the lack of paying any attention to understanding how the mind functions and beliefs function. Uh, if one hasn't done any of that kind of work or not enough of it, there's no guarantee that the aging process will be anything but you know a bad trip, to use the vernacular, the jargon of the psychedelics. Basically,
Right.
life becomes a bad trip at that stage.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with a bad trip with psychedelics? Is through and if you have a guide, it's much easier.
Sure.
Uh, you're guided to the understanding that the arisings of the various thoughts and concepts and beliefs and the attendant emotions are basically a phenomena that are arising in a still pool of water, to use that metaphor, classical metaphor, right?
Mhm.
And that there are inherent patterns in that still pool of water that arise from various afflictions or various kind of desires or aversions or attractions that arise. Basically, they create constant movement, constant distractions from the awareness that we are that pure consciousness, that stillness, basically.
Right.
So
Right.
again, on a physical level, there is all that crystallization of the body and the deterioration. On the emotional level, you see it in people who, particularly, people that are aging, and I've seen this in myself too. They get more critical, they get more irritable, they get more angry. Again, they're short-tempered, their fuse is shorter, their tolerance for other people is less. So there is basically a crystallizing of the emotional body and the emotional functions to half a dozen negative emotions, basically. You know, and so the range of emotions, to using the metaphor of a keyboard, let's say of a piano, of a keyboard, is that you end up being restricted to playing a half a dozen keys,
Mm-hmm.
basic 88 black and white keys. So the range of emotions becomes very limited. Uh, and then of course, on the cognitive level, uh, there is a stereotypic function of the mind. So concepts become even more believed in. There isn't the ability to separate, again, in through the awareness process, the function of the analytic mind from the field of consciousness in which it arises. There isn't no longer there isn't that ability to recognize that concepts are basically like that still pool of water, the rings basically that arise and move out. So there is a crystallization mentally as well. And so
Mm.
people become very limited in their belief systems, in their thoughts, in their prejudices, in their stereotypic thinking, and so
So
on. So
let me
people
stop.
die. Yeah.
Let me just stop you. So yes, and so because we're running out of time a little bit, I want to be aware of that. So how does a person um, without LSD or psilocybin or those things, if they are just people, or with those things, how can they go from aging to saging and be more aware? Like, what are some ways we can become aware of how we can help our inner organs and maintain that health of our inner organs and our joints? And how do we help ourselves to be more flexible and open with our thinking and more truly accepting of things that we kind of have to accept, but become truly accepting of it, that rising from that still pool of water? How do we do that?
Well, it's a very good question. And I would say the good news is that in the last 15 or 20 years or so, there has been much more awareness in the mainstream of of tools like mindfulness training, of yoga, of Tai Chi, of mind-body practices of various types. There's been a growing acceptance of the importance and role of psychotherapy to go in and begin to deconstruct these conditioned patterns. The growth of tools of technology such as NLP and related arts that stem from that core system, along with things like Gestalt therapy and other forms of therapy. So there's a growing understanding and awareness of these tools. That's good news, is that people have the opportunity now. People are talking about their psychedelic experiences right now in mass media, on late night television. It's become commonplace for people to talk about their psychedelic experiences. And of course, with the psychedelic renaissance, with Pollan's book, and I won't go over the ground we've gone over in previous conversations, but there is a groundswell of available knowledge and tools that are, that people will come across just in the course of their daily life as they read, as they explore the internet or various social media tools or newspapers, or if they still read books and so on. So there is that, that's on the positive side. There also is, I think, a level of honesty that's required as people get older, as we're facing, our mortality, particularly of the need to go in and take responsibility for example, healing relationships that have been, ruptured or destroyed, to make amends in that way, to confront. Again, it requires a level of sincerity and honesty to really look at what healing does this mind, body, little me constellation need. For example, to have more inner peace, more spaciousness, more more inner stillness, more quiet, basically. So that the movements, as I talked about earlier, of staging being conscious aging, is actually a movement from doing and performance to being, if you will. So that shift from doing to being, basically, requires just more spaciousness, more still time, more available time, which can happen for people if their economics are such that they can retire. So there are things, again, in the popular culture and things that people can do individually, that to take some baby steps in that direction, if they're attracted to at all to a level of healing before they pass. So
if they haven't crystallized too much and they want to be able to, uncrystallize a bit, then they have all those different tools available to them, including psychotherapy.
Yeah. So for myself, just to finish this crystallization, model, people die in thirds, Doug. They die in thirds. Depending on how they're basically structured and mobilized. Some people are more intellectually based, conceptually intellectually based. Other people are more emotionally based, more intuitive, emotionally based. Other people are more physically based, more what we used to call in psychology like a mesomorphic kind of structure, right? They're more athletic, achieving high A type, A type individuals. So people's constitutional types are important there. So you can see how people die. Some people begin to crystallize mentally first or emotionally first, and then physically. Other people crystallize more physically and then followed by emotional and mental. You have to work on all three sections, all three centers: physical, emotional, and intellectual or cognitive center. You have to actually, and that's a whole other conversation we could have about how we approach, uh, deconstructing the default network, uh, physically, emotionally, and mentally, basically, in terms of the crystallization, the decrystallization process. So that's what I've attempted to do uh, a great deal of my life since my early 20s, since those early psychedelic experiences, is when out of that came my interest in spiritual work, uh, along with martial arts, and then that led me to, eventually to Tai Chi and Qigong and related things, and an interest in, some knowledge in Chinese medicine and philosophy. So, for me, the process has, was and continues to be a focus on decrystallizing the physical in order to attain more mobility, more stability, more balance. And Tai Chi is a wonderful tool in that direction. Uh, uh, Intellectually, to maintain, the capacity to read and to write and absorb, and to retain mental stimulation. So, it's really important for me to keep to read books, whether they're electronic or digital versions or not. That's not important, but to continue to be open to learning, even professionally, because I'm still working. As you mentioned, alluded to earlier, to take on projects and possibilities for projects that are a little bit of a stretch for me, that require me to learn more. So, for example, I've recently taken on a project. Working with a group of MIT people and people from some organizations that are working around preserving coral reefs internationally. So, my role in that is to look at is how the different stakeholders in different regions of the world that are afflicted around coral destruction, uh, how the different stakeholders, whether the local fishermen or the tourist industry or local politicians or organizations that are designed, that are set up to preserve the coral, how they can work together collaboratively. So how we can use some community organizing and value, and particularly in terms of my work, my values work, how these tools can be used to increase stakeholder engagement and collaboration
Nice.
between different groups that have, in many cases, diverse interests, but partially have a need to come together to collaborate to preserve the coral, to preserve, if nothing else, the economics,
Yeah.
local economics. So
Brilliant.
that's a stretch for me. So I'm learning stuff around synthetic biology, for example. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm learning things that keep me vital intellectually. Right. So
Nice.
for me, the last part of my cultivation has been emotional. Right. So so the opening of the heart,
Hmm.
uh, and opening of the emotional body and opening of the heart, uh, doing the emotional work, doing the work on releasing the conditioned patterns of contraction, of fear, of predisposition to to compensatory and neuroses of various types. If you really go in and do that work emotionally, and for me that has been really, I would say, in the last probably 5 to 10 years, since my early 70s, has been a real focus of my own inner work to decrystallize the emotional body, if you will, so I can play, maybe not all AA keys, but I can still play a majority of those keys
Yeah.
emotionally. you will.
Beautiful.
So,
Yeah. No, that's really interesting point. And the thing that is interesting to me, whether it's psilocybin or not, the idea of even recognizing that there is a such thing as a small me or a large me, or that there's a distinction between those two things. That I am my body, but I am not my body. I am my intellect, but I'm not my intellect. I am my emotions, but I'm not my emotions. I am something encompassing all of those things, but it's more than that. There's a big me as well. There's an ability to be an observer, like when you are in those trips, whether they're good trips or bad trips, to be like, look what I'm observing. I'm observing all these thoughts, all these experiences, all these things. But it's like, whoa, you're still in this place of being the observer, and that's a really great stance to have. To be part of it and apart from it at the same time, to have that both and experience.
Yes. And that's an intermediate stage from a spiritual perspective, because there is still an identity as an observer. So one moves out of the default network into the witness, observer, and but there's still an egoic aspect to that. Okay, there's still a structure of a functional, spiritualized ego that's still within the movie. Okay, so the observer is still within the movie. There is a point beyond that where there is a recognition that there is no me, and that pure consciousness, or Buddha nature, or Para Brahman, or whatever language or term from these different traditions, they all have a similar, they all point to the same, but they all have their own language and descriptors for it. But there is a recognition that okay, is what I am.
So that seems to be a really important piece to how to allow yourself to be accepting, and particularly as the aging process says, hey, this is coming, death is on the doorstep. When that sort of thing is there, to be able to say, yeah, that's okay, because that's not really me that's dying. I am this thing that's beyond that. Seems to be
that is manifesting as me. Okay. But the me is a manifestation of that. Again, different traditions, different languages have different words and concepts for it, but they're all pointing to the same mystery, if you will. That mysterious aspect of and my favorite phrase recently has been pure consciousness. Okay. And again, it has many words, but that the Gunther is a manifestation of that pure consciousness, basically. So there is a role and a function for the Gunther, for the little me, and that role is more clearly articulated and defined and legitimized and regulated over the course of our lifetime, from the time we become toddlers to the time we become elders. Okay, but there is a point prior to the toddler and post elder where one can return to the source, if you will, which is this pure consciousness, and then the Gunther character becomes it becomes like an echo. When I am in the mountains and I yell that name Gunther, and you hear that echo, there's a capacity to recognize that Gunther is just it's an arising, okay, within this field, within this frameless field, this gateless gate of consciousness.
Yeah.
And that does not, specify that any particular type of behavior or non-behavior. It doesn't suggest that one is. I would say this, to be honest. It does invite a loosening up and a letting go of being too active and too busy. There is a movement from doing to being, So there's more time, there's more spaciousness, there's more capacity to sit quietly and reflect, or maybe to write or to communicate with people. So there is an aspect of slowing down, and because nature operates at a medium to slow speed, except when there's danger. Okay, you see this in the animal kingdom. There may be like 15 or 20 minutes of a survival to eat and survive, but the rest of the time it's pretty medium slow.
Yeah.
So there is in this aging state of the saging process a slowing down, more spaciousness, more of a window, allowing this window of spaciousness to be recognized and arise. Uh, and within that, one can just be, or one can also entertain different practices. But even spiritual practices at that point can become a distraction or another kind of identity, another kind of little me identity. And that's again one of the occupational hazards of spirituality. So,
Nice. I like that. That's very interesting. Thank you.
mhm.
But it's interesting that you should say that it's this ability to slow down, the ability to sit in the silence. Going back to music. You and I are both musicians, and I often try to do that when I'm playing. Is just sit and be silent, and just not to play anything until like I need to, and then just really pay attention to the sounds as they, one follows the other one, and what has to come. And I think it's really true. A lot of times we live our lives so like, oh, go, 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 but nature moves slowly. Out here in the country where I'm living currently, these deer just walk by, and they stop and they chew something, but if suddenly something spooks them, if there's a bear that shines, then they take off.
Yeah.
But only far enough, to be sure they're safe, and then they.
And even that pattern is very interesting because if you look at that through the lens of a Tai Chi model, basically,
Yeah.
one of the wonderful things about the Eastern model of exercise, let's say in Tai Chi, is not only does it help things like leg strength and balance and joint strength and and eventually soft tissue enhancement of soft tissue and blood circulation and so on, but it necessitates a level of calming down, of quiet, of stillness, for example, that involves the mind and the body working together. So what you described, for example, musically, is sitting down and pausing before you play, for example, just to come in contact with the source. And then you become more of a channel, more of a vehicle for expressing something that's coming through you. In order to do that, you have to be quiet. You have to kind of deconstruct, if you will, the mind-body condition pattern in its normal reactive or
And in a way, I
proactive.
think that is conscious aging. That is saging. What it brings us to is that not only is that in music, but it's when you're talking to someone, when you like can just be still and listen, and then not speak until there's something that really is important, more important than the silence, to say. It's again coming from that same space that I think arrives at through these practices, the meditative practices, and being able to sit and be patient and to accept, the silence, and to accept who you are and where you are and what's going on. I had
For example, again, using the martial arts as an example,
yeah.
The practice of standing meditation. I don't know if you're familiar with that. There's
Yeah,
certain
for sure.
standing meditation. So traditionally that was deployed by the samurai and by swordsmen and by military people that had an interest in the spiritual life. And because in a standing position, they could more easily draw their sword and move into a response to an adversary or to being attacked. So they could, and you see that you mentioned the deer moving from stillness into immediate movement, right? So having that stillness as the foundation, actually, from a functional standpoint, allows more accelerated response, basically,
Right.
because it's not being filtered through a conceptual framework.
Right. That's true.
It's,
And it can be from any direction as well. The standing meditation is
yes,
like you come
yes,
from anywhere, but
that's right.
you're able to be responsive to it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Gosh, it's fun talking to you, Gunther.
yeah, my pleasure.
So really interesting that the people die in thirds. That just is going to stick with me for a while. It's
Yeah,
really
take a look at people you've known who've passed, whether it's family or friends or people that you know, and see if this particular conceptual lens that I provided around dying in thirds, how that might apply. Okay,
yeah.
did they first, for example, begin to show signs of cognitive impairment, for example, or dementia? Did that arise first?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, or was it a series of physical limitations and issues first? Or what was happening on an emotional level with their capacity to respond with loving kindness, with compassion, with patience,
Right.
with love, as opposed to reactive anger or impatience or irritability? Uh, Take a look and see if this particular lens that I provided today, how that might apply. See what particular validity or merit it might have in your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And
Love
I
it.
would invite the listeners to this program or the viewers of this program to do the same.
Thank you. Let me just ask you one final question before we go. So this idea of this is all coming from Gunther or Doug or whomever is an echo in the grand universe, arising from that stillness and goes off into the source of energy. Do you have a belief that there's a afterlife? Do you have a belief that there's something that will, go on? That what happens to Gunther after, you've shuffled off the mortal coil?
Yeah, I think my sense of it is, and this is informed largely by my experiences of stillness and emptiness in a
Mm-hmm.
Buddhist sense, my meditation practice and certainly some psychedelic experiences, is that the Gunther personality disappears, basically. It's ashes to ashes. Okay? Uh, there is a potential for continuation of a kind of energetic body that in the Eastern tradition and the Western traditions is probably is known as the astral body, uh, which is an energetic body, but it doesn't have the personality characteristics of the Gunther. Right, so it's a different kind of constellation, and but there's no guarantee that that is complete either, because the spiritual work that I'm describing involves not only the cultivation of the astral body, uh, but also the spiritual body, if you will. Okay, so the astral body, from the perspective I'm speaking now, and the belief system around that is partially completed. But we have the opportunity in ordinary life, in our ordinary conditioned life, to develop the astral capacity to a certain level, so that when we die, there's a possibility of some continuation and some further learnings, if you will, or lessons that I don't have any what those are at the moment. But again, I think there's a possibility of there is a potential for some kind of continuation, but it doesn't have the form that we normally attribute to reincarnation or the belief systems around that and so on. I think it's those are like human attempts to approximate an understanding of what happens after death, but they're filtered through a planetary lens that's colored by economic and political and other egoic considerations, so that we tend to get identified with a past life, like being a Cleopatra or being, an Einstein or what have you. Again, all of that, I think, is pretty nonsensical.
It's interesting you should say Einstein. I've heard a lot of people say that they were Cleopatra in the past life, or Napoleon, or whatever. I've never heard anyone say they were Einstein in a past life. Anyway, thank you so much for today.
You're welcome. Thank you. I enjoy our conversations a lot. I hope there is some benefit to people
I'm sure
of their tuning in.
So let's do this again.
Indeed. God bless. Take good care.
Thank you. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.